to Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Uncensored.
I am Dr. Ruthie Payno Simmons.
Where we get honest about the real challenges and possibilities in education and beyond.
Welcome to the first episode of Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Payno Simmons Uncensored. I am Ruthie Payno Simmons, and I am excited to launch this podcast. A few months ago, without warning, I lost a very important job that was cut with all of the shifts that are happening around the pushback on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I reflected on next steps with everything that's happening. One of the things I wanted to do was start a podcast. And one of the reasons for that was to be able to reclaim my voice, maintain my authenticity, and continue to talk about education in unapologetic ways that I need to, from the experiences that I have had, but also to support so many educators that are out there engaging in the work and wondering, how do I continue to do what I know is best for students when there's pushback on making sure that each and every child has access, representation, meaningful participation, and positive outcomes in schools. Those come from the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center, where I held my last position. I realized I wanted to tell stories that matter, stories that changes things, stories that disrupt harm that's being done in educational spaces. And so that's why the title of the show is called Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Payno Simmons Uncensored. Without further ado, I want to talk about something that came to my attention in May. I read an article from the Chicago Defender called "You Must Speak Truth to Power: A Candid Conversation with Ben Crump on How the Intentional Pushback Against Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is Pushing Towards Erasure." So I want to start with real talk, right? And I think that with the real talk, what I want to do is share how, in my own personal journey, I have seen firsthand how organizational cultures can actually silence people who are engaging in the work, how we can begin to censor when conversations are uncomfortable or people aren't necessarily ready to have those conversations. And I've even seen how, in order to get along, we begin to self-censor, or because of different actions that organizations might unknowingly take when people speak freely, how people begin to self-censor for safety. I personally have experienced that on multiple occasions across multiple organizations that I've been a part of. I think the truth of the matter is that we have to speak truth to power. Even though Ben Crump was talking about what's happening at large in society, it made me think about, what does it mean for what we're doing in education? And of course, I know that I've already talked about how organizational culture can unintentionally silence people who are engaging in work and censoring of what we can or cannot say. And then we begin to self-censor to the point that we don't recognize who we are and what we're standing for. We begin to become super agreeable in order to either stay at the table or to not be seen, especially if you're someone who looked like me as an angry Black woman. I've had multiple situations where I've had to refrain from saying what I was really thinking because I did not want people to lean into the stereotypes or mistake my passion and my stance for doing what's right for all of our students, and especially students that have been historically marginalized, that they were conflating my passion with me being angry. And so there's a level of self-censoring that begins to happen just to play down those stereotypes or to prevent those from happening. But the real talk is that we have to engage in this work and have the conversations. We cannot stop the work we've been doing with regards to centering our students' lived experiences in the work. I think what's really important is that we understand that when we aren't having these real conversations, then change doesn't happen. And what I appreciate about the Ben Crump interview is that he drew from some of our ancestors who lived this work, who engaged in civil rights work. One of the things that I appreciated that came out of the interview was Crump said, and I'm going to read this quote, "If you remove history, if you remove context, you undermine intellect and you weaken resistance." What he was saying was all of the efforts to move and to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, to get rid of history as it happened, to get rid of Black history, African American history, what it does is it takes away our opportunities as educators to provide our students with a holistic experience around what really happened in history. It undermines their ability to have the truth and the intellect to then begin to push back on and take a stand against actions that are harmful. And so when he talks about speaking truth to power and making sure that we not roll back in our own efforts of engaging in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, he is saying to us that we have to take a stand. And I am saying to us that we have to take a stand. I have worked as a classroom teacher. I've worked as a building administrator. I've worked as a district administrator, a state and national technical assistance provider. And I can tell you that the work that we have done and that I have seen school districts and educators engaging in over the last decade in particular has been really profound, in that educators have been working to center the experiences of students and families and caregivers in educational decision-making. And now there's pushback on that. So what do we do? And I want to get to the point of that. What do we do when we're engaging in a work? But before doing that, I kind of want to read a couple of things to you that I feel is important. Okay, so in the interview, Ben Crump reminds us that every era of progress is followed by a fierce backlash. And we really are seeing this. From the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to banning Black literature, what we really are witnessing is a coordinated effort to actually dull the power of education, erase things that have really happened, and then also undermine the pursuit of equity. And so what I appreciate about Crump is that he names in his interview what many of us are feeling, right? This is more than political. It is deeply personal and it's strategic. And so he says, like I said before, if you remove context and history, then you're not only removing the context, but you're undermining intellect, and that weakens resistance over time. And so we need to make sure that we are not allowing for ourselves to be dulled because of some of these things that are happening in our society. Ben talked about how struggle is the work. This is something that I can relate to because it's been an element in all of my work, that the struggle has been there, whether it's the struggle to know how to have a conversation around the impact of race on education or gender or the intersections of race and gender. I can tell you, as a Black female and a child of the 70s, school did not reflect my lived experiences. So there was a lot of erasure in terms of the language that I used, how I saw myself as a brown-skinned female, not seeing things reflecting me, really made it hard for me to develop a positive self-image. A lot of our continuous improvement work is around making sure that our students excel academically, social and emotionally, and behaviorally. We have to make sure that our students' identities and the ways in which they see themselves are being affirmed in positive ways, that they don't graduate with a high GPA but a negative sense of self. And so we have to continue this work. When Ben talks about struggle, Ben is really saying that even though struggle doesn't feel good, what it really does is it helps us to make progress. Learning even can be a struggle, but through the struggle is where we break through and we learn something new, or we expand our thinking. Crump extended this truth in our context today by saying, if we truly want to see progress, then we need to be prepared to struggle. This conversation around speaking truth to power made me think about what is our responsibility as educators in this era where we're being told of things we cannot say and do. We have to teach and we have to lead, and we have to make sure that there's agitation in our teaching and in our leading. So what does that mean for us as educators? It means that we have to resist the pressure to water things down or make things more palatable in ways that allows for harm to continue to happen to our students. At the end of the day, we are responsible for the experiences that our students have. And we want to make sure that the ways in which we're making decisions and putting systems in place, that we are supporting students in having an overall sense of well-being, while also helping them to develop critical thinking, historical understandings, and cultural awareness. It means we have to protect spaces for our educators and our students to be able to have honest conversations about what they're experiencing in our school systems. We have to make sure that we help everyone know that as we're engaging in these conversations that might be uncomfortable, but discomfort doesn't mean the same thing as being unsafe. It is often in our discomfort that we have to support one another because this work can be heavy and the cost is real. So what does this mean for us as we're engaging in this work? I'm going to say that I'm thinking about the continuous improvement process. Educators are engaging in a continuous improvement process every day in the work that they're doing, whether it's implementing plans from looking at data, whether it's in real-time studying practices and making shifts to be responsive to what you are seeing as you're working with students. These are the opportunities for us to actually speak truth to power and also do truth to power. Let's talk about some examples. Let's say we are in our classroom, or maybe we're having lunch, or maybe we're having conversations with our colleagues, and a colleague makes a comment about a student that is not a positive comment, that a certain student is always in trouble. One way to speak truth to power, because that adult, that teacher, or that educator has the power to shape the student's life and shape the student's identity, whether it's how people perceive the student or how the student perceive himself or herself or themselves. So one of the things that we could do is to talk with our colleague and redirect that conversation. I know that your perception is that child is always in trouble, but maybe we need to think about what the student's experience is. And why don't we talk about that student by their name and in a way that is solving a problem and not putting that student down? It is the everyday decisions we make, conversations we have that moves things. If we are constantly redirecting negative conversations and reframing them to situate that student in a positive light, then we are speaking truth to power. Because the power isn't just what someone might be saying from a political platform. It's also the ideas and worldviews that we've bought into and that we are actually letting influence how we see one another and how we see students, especially students that may be culturally different from us. So they may be speaking a certain way. They may be responding a certain way. They may be behaving a certain way. If there is a dominant norm that is not the same as the way in which that student or that family member or caregiver is speaking or behaving, we might be quick to label their behavior as a problem, when in reality, the problem is how we're viewing the person, the student, the way in which we are making assumptions about who they are and then assigning value to that. One way we can speak truth to power is through reframing how we or someone else is talking to us about students. I remember being a principal and having a parent call me one evening about their concern about their child and starting the conversation with calling another child a psychopath. I remember having to pause, knowing that I needed to be responsive to that parent and respect that parent's concern, but also speak truth to a power about how we talk about students and say, we're going to pause because I will not allow for you to refer to another person's child as a psychopath. That is unacceptable. And I would never let anyone refer to your child as a psychopath. So let's start this conversation over. I know you're concerned about an incident that occurred. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to do it in a way that leaves each child's integrity intact. If we can't do that, then I cannot have the conversation with you. And we were able to reframe the conversation, talk about the parent's concern for their child without dehumanizing the other child. And so that is an example of doing truth to power in the educational space. We can do that also in the continuous improvement process in terms of who we have at the table when we're looking at data. Do we have a team that is diverse, that reflects the identities of the students and families in the school community? We can do that by choosing data that allows for us to focus on what is happening in our systems. So we're studying what students are saying about their experiences in the school. So we're looking at that type of data. We are studying instructional practices. So we are ensuring that we are collecting data that allows for us to reflect on our instructional and pedagogical practices in the classroom so that we can understand how students are experiencing teaching and learning. And in that, we can look at, do they see themselves reflected in the curriculum? Do they see themselves reflected in the imagery that's presented in the schools and in the curriculum? We can look at student response time? How often are students allowed to share what they know? There are so many ways that we can speak truth to power in the continuous improvement processes, in the teaching and learning processes that we engage in school. And one way is going to be how we talk about students and how we can be champions of making sure when someone is talking about a student or family in a way that may be unintentional, but is derogatory nonetheless, there's a difference between intent and impact, right? So you intend to solve a problem, so you're talking about it, but the ways in which you're talking about the student or the family or the caregiver can do harm. So we can reframe that conversation and focus on problem solving and not on the family or the student being the problem. When we engage in looking at data to understand what's happening in our systems, we're speaking truth to power when we actually own the inadequacies that we see in our educational systems, and then we begin to correct those. And then we look at student outcomes to understand, are the outcomes improving as we change our practice? When we talk about speaking truth to power, we have to tell the truth about what's happening in our systems and not focus solely on students, but focus on ourselves. 2, we have to be critical friends to one another. When someone is saying something that is harmful, we're redirecting that. We're making sure that we are holding ourselves and holding one another accountable for using language that honors and lifts up our students, educators, families, caregivers, and community members in our school systems. And that we are thinking about what type of language and identifying and defining what harmful language is, and then making sure that we work to remove that language from our practices. Another thing that we can do is make sure that we are allowing for staff to share what their experiences are and what their barriers are as they're trying to support centering students in their lived experiences and making sure that they have what they need to support students. As we engage in this work, we can continue to make sure that our systems reflect what our students say that they need, what our parents are saying that our students need, and then making sure that we hold the line when we're getting pushback to do things that we know is going to harm our students. We are professionals. We have credentials. We have gone through the processes of making sure that we understand how to support our students and our families, and we can't let anyone take that away. For classroom teachers, you have an immense amount of power in terms of what you do in the classroom every day from moment to moment. From the moment when students enter the classroom, how are you greeting students as they enter into the classroom? How are you responding to students? Are you calling on students who look like you, or are you calling on all the students? Are you understanding different ways that students are better at engaging in learning and using a variety of ways of getting students engaged in the learning process? Are you making sure you're scanning the room before you call out any one student for any behavior that you're seeing? When you're designing teaching and learning, are you including students' perspectives in that teaching and learning? Are you asking them for feedback on what you're doing on a regular basis so you can change your practices as you go? The more that we engage with our students and center their voices and allow for them to be a part of the conversation about what's happening in the classroom, the more we can shape classrooms that are responsive to all students. I think that we have to aim to make sure that our systems are equitable, but I think it is what we do in terms of how we're engaging in our relationships with students and our interactions with students, the interactions with the curriculum and the lessons, and how we're making sure they're responsive to students so that they can engage and interact in ways that help them to shape positive sense of self and positive identities. I'm saying a lot of different things, but I'm coming out of the gate. I'm ready to move and have these conversations. I have a list of things that I want to cover. I will say this, that many of our educators are feeling pressured to make things palatable. We cannot make things palatable at the expense of doing our jobs to make sure that our students feel like they are safe and that they can show up as their authentic selves and not be told to check who they are at the door. When we do that, when we ask students to check their Blackness at the door, or to check their language at the door, or to check who they are at the door, their cultural values coming from home, we are engaging in the process of erasure, which has a profound negative impact on how students see themselves and on their mental and emotional well-being. I graduated from high school with good grades, and yet I had to figure out who I was. And I had a very negative sense of self because I didn't see myself reflected in all of the accomplishments that have been made in our society, because our history books did not have that information. It wasn't until I went to college and began to study history that I began to see the contributions of people who look like me. And let me take a step back. I had a high school teacher who started that journey for me by sharing every day when I was in 11th grade, the first time I started seeing people reflecting my identities, doing positive things in society. And my American history teacher, I'll never forget Mr. Lewis, would come in and every day he would talk about everyday ordinary Black people and their contributions. That had a profound impact on me. And I wanted to know more about my history because it was absent in my K through 10 experience. And so how do we make sure that we're including our students' histories in their pre-K 12 experiences so that they see themselves in ways that make them want to come to school? We talk about issues with attendance. When we talk about issues with attendance, that really is about students a lot of times feeling like the schools and the adults don't get them, not responsive to them. Yes, I know that there are a lot of things that can go on outside of school that impacts attendance. We can't control those things, but what we can do is control what we do in schools and create conditions in schools that make kids want to come. I used to skip 6 hour every now and then to go to Burger King down the street from my high school. When I got into that particular classroom, I never missed that classroom. So I didn't go to Burger King for the whole semester because I could not wait to hear what Mr. Lewis was going to say next about people who looked like me. We can't afford to hide our true histories that have happened or segregate them and only talk about them once a year. We have to talk about what actually happened in history as it happened and do it with multiple historical resources that allow for our students to be able to make decisions about what they're seeing and learning and then be able to engage in critical thinking. Again, Crump says, if you want progress, prepare to struggle. I know the struggle is real and that we have to engage in it. We can do that through our everyday classroom practices, and we can do that in the continuous improvement processes. We have to make sure we're thinking about what data has been privileged and what data do we need to look at. And I'm telling you, if we look at systemic data and we begin to understand what's actually happening in our systems, we'll begin to see what work needs to be done. And then we'll be able to make those changes to our continuous improvement plans, ways in which we're going to continue to address adult practices, behaviors, dispositions, and policies to make sure that we're creating conditions that our students can thrive. I've really gotten into gardening in the last several years. I have a beautiful garden today, but the first thing I wanted to put in my garden, because I love the color purple, is lavender. And I planted a whole bed of lavender, and it just didn't do well. It did not thrive. And so I started studying lavender to understand what needed to change because I wanted to give it another go. The mistakes I made was I put the lavender in a place that did not get sun. I put the lavender in a space where the grounds were constantly moist, and lavender likes dry soil. Everything that I did set the plants up not to thrive. I could have either blamed the lavender or studied my own practices to understand what to do differently. I had to move the garden bed. I wanted to look out of my office window and see a field of purple, but I learned that that was not going to work and that the plant needed to be in a position that was best for it. I found a place on our hill where we get sunlight throughout the day, where the moisture doesn't sit, and planted a whole nother bed of lavender. And this is year 3, and they are thriving and getting bigger, and the aroma is beautiful. And that made me think about education. Once I corrected the conditions for planting the lavender and maintaining lavender, it thrived. In education, we have to ask ourselves, have we created the conditions through our continuous improvement processes and through our everyday practices and policies for each and every student to thrive? Are we putting conditions in place that allows for each individual student to thrive? And it can be done. And we'll talk more about those types of things throughout the podcast. But I just wanted to start by saying this podcast allows for me to keep it real in a way where I don't have to be concerned about self-censoring. And even though I'm not going to censor, I am really an advocate for creating inclusive spaces. I want to model what I stand for. So that's why I call myself an inclusive disruptor, because I'm going to disrupt things that are not right, but I'm going to do it in a way that I learned from the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center that was shut down by the new administration. And that's how I, along with others, lost our jobs. I'm going to do it in a way that draws people in. I want to draw you into the conversation. I want to draw you into the discourse. I want to draw you into knowing that you can keep doing this work in ways that you don't compromise your integrity about what you believe is best for children. And you can do it in a way that is in alignment with what is expected in our continuous improvement processes. And also, this podcast is helpful for me because when we were shut down, I felt like I did not have a voice. I could not speak on the things that were happening to our center, to our staff, to me. This outlet allows for me to be able to do what is important for me and to stay in alignment with my values. I want to leave you with one question that I think is really important. How do we hold the lines when our work is under fire? We show up every day and we do what we are convicted to do. I want to do a shout out to the teacher out west who was told to remove a poster that read something to the effect, "All are welcome here," because she continued to hold the line for what she thought was important to make sure all of her students felt like they were welcomed. Because you cannot learn if you don't feel welcomed. You cannot learn if you don't feel like you're liked. You cannot learn if you're in a space where it feels hostile. She held the line, even though she was told that if she did not take that poster down that she bought from a teacher supply store, that she would be disciplined at the end of the semester. Because she stood her ground, people from the school community, students, school community members, other educators, people from across the country began to support the cause because they understood that everyone should feel welcome everywhere all the time. And who gets the right to tell someone they don't belong? Everyone who's in this country today that is not an indigenous came here from somewhere else and had to acclimate to a space. So who gives anyone the right to tell somebody that they don't belong, especially in a public school? I just want you to know that there are people who are willing to take a stand, even when it costs them something. I'm one of those people who I'm willing to take the stand. I have lost a livelihood from taking a stand. I will continue to do so because I believe in public education. I believe in our educators. And I believe that is the space where we promote and protect democracy. And we do that by making sure that we have an environment that is inclusive, that is safe, that is responsive culturally, that sustains people's identities in ways that keeps them whole. That is what this podcast is going to be about. Feel free to share this with others who are in this work and wanting to engage in this work. And know that if you are one who is holding the line, you are not alone. There are people across this country that's willing to take a stand and do what is right for students. And there are ways that we can do this within our continuous improvement processes, within the ways in which we engage with students in everyday interactions that will allow for all of our students to know who they are, have a strong sense of self, a positive sense of self, not only graduate with good grades and with good behavior, but also with a strong sense of self and purpose, and not feel like they've had to give up parts of who they are in order to receive an education. Until next time, I am sending you positive energy and encouraging you to know that you can not only speak the truth to power in what you do in small moments, because those are what matter, but you also can do truth to power in what you do every day, and it will make a difference. It's not the big grand things that happen that changes things. It's the everyday things that we do, those decisions we make, those choices we make, those interactions that we have that changes things. It makes me think about sports. And for an example, I think about how sometimes there's that star athlete that makes it down the court or makes a free throw and makes the points that wins the game in the last seconds. And everybody's cheering, and that person gets a lot of kudos, and they should, because they made a difference in the last moment. But it was the points that the team made throughout the progression of the game that allowed for that last scoring of the point to make the difference. Again, that person who scored that point, awesome. But it was every move that was made by the team leading up to that scoring that made the difference. What you do matters. every day, whether it's that small conversation with a colleague, whether it's speaking at a conference, whether it's having a conversation in a parent meeting. Everything we do allows for us to have the opportunity to either speak truth to power or demonstrate truth to power in action. So as I sign off, I just want to thank you for your work. I know that as educators and as parents in this work, that it is complex work, it's dynamic work, it's ever-changing work. But I want to let you know that as long as you continue to center yourself as a learner and not be afraid to take a stand for the things that you think are right for students, that you'll continue to make a difference. So until next time, keep doing the work that you do and remember that power concedes nothing without a demand. Quoting Frederick Douglass, if we want to change things, we cannot be silent. If we want to change things, we cannot be still. If we want to change things, we have to be bold, even if that bold is done in a small way. And that's, again, the last thing I'll say too is that I want us to know that resistance looks different for every person. And so your resistance might be the ways in which you hold your colleagues up. Your resistance might be the ways in which you redirect negative conversations about students. Your resistance might be what you're doing to have conversations with legislation to let them know what is important for students. No matter how big or small it is, it's all important and it all works together to move the needle to make sure that when our children show up, that they know that they are welcomed and that they belong and that the schools are theirs and that we are there to support their journey and to make sure that we provide them what they need to be successful and to see themselves in ways that is positive and powerful. Thank you so much for joining Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Payno Simmons Uncensored. I truly appreciate you taking time to listen. In addition to this podcast, I have a company called RPS Educational Impact, where I support school districts, educational entities, and other organizations who are wanting to improve their systems through continuous improvement processes, and also those who want to make sure that the systems are working for all students and for the school community. RPS Educational Impact is dedicated to empowering students, families, and educators. Our mission is to support educational agencies in developing innovative solutions that strengthen educational practices, policies that enrich learning experiences and support each student's success. We enjoy supporting educators at all levels through professional development, coaching, continuous improvement, and implementation supports to create learning environments where all students can thrive. So visit rpsimpact.com to find out more about the technical assistance that we can provide you upon request. Finally, thank you. I appreciate the work you do every day. Until next time, remember to keep it real. Take care.
Welcome to Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Uncensored.
I am Dr. Ruthie Payno
Where we
Simmons.
get honest about the real challenges and possibilities in education and beyond.